So here is how to create an enterprise class PowerShell module. Or really it's the story of Kevin wrote mistakes, but he's from Atlanta and doesn't swear. So really it's all of the fuck-ups we've made along the way and how we fix them.
And mess-ups we've seen other people make.
Yeah.
So we can learn from our mistakes, but also we've seen some doozies as well.
So my name's Jim Moyle. I work with Kevin at FS Logics. I'm basically the tea boy. So anybody needs a drink, I'll go and get him a drink. I'm proud to be part of the CTP program.
Are you?
Absolutely.
I'm Kevin Gibbon. I work with Jim at FS Logics and also Benny and Michelle and a new member, Christian. Yeah, and that's me.
That's RTO Software Kevin. Let's give him a big applause.
So if we're going to write a PowerShell module, who's it for? Right? What is the audience that you're looking to provide tools for? Anybody ever interviewed somebody and said, how good is your PowerShell? Yeah? What is the response that you get mostly? I could copy and paste with the best of them. I can read PowerShell and I can use other people's stuff. That is the most common response I get in an interview when I'm asking people how good their PowerShell is. But that's fine, right? If people just want to use PowerShell for a one-liner or a single command, I have no problem with that. How many people are around that stage? You Remco, that's not...
I was going to make one remark about Stack Overflow. There was a recent study, and
Yep.
obviously all developers look at Stack Overflow and copy and paste code. And from a security point of view, somebody researched the top 500 answers relating to security, and 95% of them were actually very wrong, in the sense that they recommend insecure things like SHA-1, MD5, and so, you know, copy-paste Stack Overflow learn is good, but...
We have a slide about that later. So those users we're looking at, but we're also looking at experts. Jeffrey Stover here. Very nice man. I once got into a Twitter argument with him and got pretty heavily schooled, but that's fine. I'm not saying that everybody needs to be this good, but if you're already writing your own modules, or the people in your company writing their own modules, then this is also the audience that you need to address, because these are people who are going to be building tools that are based upon your tool set, and then including it in other things. And then the last set of people is machines, right? You're building your PowerShell commandlets so people can use them in automation, right? So they need to take input in the correct way and they need to output the correct things as well. How many people do a lot of automation in there? Yeah? All right. Code coverage.
Okay, code coverage. So, you gave this one to me?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. This one's mine. Okay. Is Sean here? This is before your time, Sean, so this one's okay. Code coverage. So you look at the modules from VMware Horizon and you get back 2 commands. Run the one and you get their entire object back of their entire API. So when we said it was my mistakes that we wrote this thing over, we've seen some in some other code right there. That object is pretty huge. When we're talking about doing PowerShell, we want you to be quick, do a single thing. When you get that thing done, return so that it's not so slow. We're going to be giving you examples all through here of slow things we did that really, if you want to do it enterprise-wide, and you have hundreds or thousands of users, and that slows you down by 40 seconds a call, or it takes up so much memory that you run out of memory, then it's not going to be enterprise ready. If you go and look at the modules that Microsoft has written, or the ones that the FS Logics has written, you're going to see them in a dot notation, right? So Microsoft dot object right there, Microsoft dot another object, and when you import those modules, you only import what you need for it. when you need to take that in consideration when you're writing your own modules. Yeah?
Yeah. So you do need to cover your entire API, but not like this. All right. Git.
All right. So, Microsoft GitHub, GitLab, you guys familiar with it? You know the Git? See, when I hold my hand on it, means you mimic me if you know the Git. Remember when I said, did you read a book? I was checking if you knew this here. Okay. So it's a code repository, set of commands for you to take your code in and out of a code repository. If you're going to have an enterprise module, if you're going to write code that is in your company that's going to end up at your users are going to be using those functions, or customers you sell or take care of are going to be using those functions, then you have to plan on one day you're going to get promoted and somebody else is going to have to come in and work on that code. And if you're as good as I think you all are, it might be 2 people that have to come in and work on your code, right? Just to replace you. And then if you have 2 people working on the code, you need to have functions that handle your repository. That's what Git is for, right? I can go out right now to any one of those GitLab or GitHub, depending on what you're, do we go over the difference of those? I think we do. But the when you go there, you can use Git commands, and you can do git -- help to find out what they are. But basically, you use those commands to pull down a repository, like if you want to clone one locally, make changes to it, add functions to it. If you're starting from scratch, you would add functions, files, you know, PowerShell module, .ps1, PSM, whatever. And then someone else can then go to the repository and clone it, add it. You can lock things, decide who gets in there. You can be the owner of it and decide who is allowed to make updates, and you can review them first. All in all, if you do this, then you'll maintain something that you can use for the enterprise. What I've seen over the years is lots of people can write code, and lots of people are really, really good at writing code, as long as they're the programmer of it. The guy that's the really good guy who can write code is one that someone else can be the programmer of it. That's why you need to start using Git.
Anybody know Carl Webster and his documentation scripts? Yay! So I started helping Carl out with those a little while ago. I was like, all right, can you just send me a link to your GitHub, Carl? What do you mean? He said, no, they're on my computer. I'm like, so a local Git repository? No. So I looked on his hard drive, and he got hundreds of copies of PowerShell scripts going .1, .2, .3, and I'm looking at this thing in sheer horror.
That was the WVS, the Webster versioning system.
Yeah, Webster versioning system, absolutely. Carl, here's Git, meet Carl. And use versioning.
Hey, what's the difference between GitHub and GitLab?
So, GitLab you can use for commercial projects for free. GitHub you can't. And GitLab also has CI/CD tools, which we'll talk about in a bit, included. Those are the 2. I'm sure there are many more differences, but those are the 2 that are kind of important to me between GitLab and GitHub.
All of Microsoft's open source is on
GitHub.
GitHub, which they just acquired.
Yep. All right. So when you're writing a PowerShell function, it should do one single, simple thing. Yep. If you want to do a complex task, then don't include it in your module. All right. You can write it as a script. You can put it on your blog. You stick it in Git. I don't care. But every single PowerShell function that you write should do one thing and one thing only. Yeah. And it's super important that you don't put big monolithic things in your PowerShell functions, because A, it's very hard to support and maintain, and B, that's what the people who are using your tools are meant to be doing with those functions rather than you writing it for them.
Quick plug for Jim's site. Who's gone to Jim's site and watched the PowerShell videos that he's put up on YouTube? Do we have a link? If we don't have a link to it, we'll give you a link. All right. One of the I suggest you go there. One of the cool things he has in there is PowerShell is written on top of .NET. Since it's written on top of .NET, you can do anything .NET can do, which the C# guys, the JavaScript guys, you can do anything, including UI. So if you go there, Jim will give you a presentation in YouTube on how to put a UI into your PowerShell. And here's how this fits in with the modules. That isn't an example that you would put in a module. A UI on front of PowerShell is for when you have to collect 15 parameters to a function, and you don't want to type it on a command line, you don't remember which ones to do, so you put it into a UI, and then what happens at the submit on that UI? That's when it goes to the modules and gets it in there. So something like a UI in a PowerShell is something you don't put in a module. Now what you do put in the modules are verbs, right? Get and set type verbs, enable, disable type verbs. And what we're suggesting, and it's not mandatory, that's the one thing about PowerShell is you can violate every rule in here, and we've seen examples of it, and we'll show you more. But if you pair every get with a set, every enable with a disable, all right, then someone who knows PowerShell is going to know how to use your module without having to look things up. If you had called it set plaster template and get plaster template, then I would have known how to set a plaster template. And I'll tell you what plaster is later on. But if you say initialize, I got to go look through your help, or I got to clone your GitHub repository locally, go through it to figure out what's going on. So, how many is that? Quickly, that's 99 right there, types of verbs that you have in PowerShell. And they're broken into these categories here. Guess add is a verb. So take that word verb loosely. It's something that you are doing inside a module. But if you look in there, you should be able to find a verb for what you want to do in your module. And I don't know, have you ever found that you couldn't get coverage?
No, I have read through the list a few times sometimes to figure out which one I needed to do, but I've never actually had to use an unapproved verb. I've always found something on the list to help.
To go to the full list, just type get verb at the command line and it'll give them to you in all those categories.
Everybody recognize this, right? This is the ISE? Yeah? Do not use this tool. It is...
No, seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously, don't.
So, Microsoft have publicly stated that they are not working on this anymore. So it's effectively deprecated. You will not see any new features for the ISE. It is not multi-platform. It is not extensible. It is a nightmare for debugging, and it is slow. This is what you should use. This is VS Code. It is all of the things that the ISE is not. It is quick, it is extensible, and it is multi-platform. And anybody who's doing anything cool with any code editing extensions, this is where it's going. I was very pleased in Tom's session. Who was in Tom's PowerShell session yesterday? Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool session. So I was very pleased to see you using VS Code, Tom. That was excellent. I mean, that was the least of what was excellent about your session, but... Go on, Tom, what are you saying?
The only reason I was in there is because my IntelliSense broke in ISE, so I couldn't use it anymore.
So, if you didn't hear that, he said the only reason he was in there is because his IntelliSense broke in ISE, which happens every single time I used to bring it up before I used Visual Studio Code. So
We have to interview. We have PowerShell interns at FS Logics. And when I bring them in for the interview, I turn my laptop around and I ask them to show me something. And if they type PowerShell _ISE and hit enter, the interview's pretty much over. These new kids, if they don't know Visual Studio Code coming out of school, then I'm going to go recruit from another school, right? The kid we just hired, that's the first VS Code. I actually didn't listen to anything else that said after that. I thought I could teach this kid. All right.
What was his first command? Get job?
Well,
All right, so I should make an announcement here on video for everyone. I don't drink anymore. I don't drink any less, but I don't drink anymore. Okay.
Explorability, this guy here, Sir Ranulph Fiennes, the greatest living explorer, if you don't know him. So, you know I said you should use approved verbs for all of your functions? You should also do this. You should find a 3-letter acronym that, or even just 3 letters that are relevant to a business, and prefix all of the nouns with that same one. Yeah? So that means that people can do searches on the prefix and find all your commands. And it also means that you're not going to conflict with anybody else. What thing does every bit of software tend to provide? A version, right? And everybody writes a get version function. Now, if you've got 20 odd get version functions on your machine, yeah, PowerShell's going to pick one for you. I don't know which one, but it's certainly going to pick one for you to run. Who knows? So, really important that you prevent conflicts, and the sort of, I guess the community have settled on this is the correct way to do it. Is put a company or a module prefix to all of your nouns.
Is there a way to know which ones are already taken?
No.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So if you're if the ISC's IntelliSense is working on your system, now not globally, but if it's working on your system and you do get dash F, you could see, at least on your system, there's no one else doing FSL. Can they conflict? Yeah.
You could check the, what's the Microsoft repository where
PS Gallery.
modules, yeah.
Yeah, you could go to PS Gallery. So
So you can write a PowerShell script that checks the gallery and
So there's a gallery of all the PowerShell modules out there. Remco is saying if you can't hear him, and you could go there and check against that gallery. And then he suggested you should actually write code to go there and check against that gallery, and that would be get-fsl gallery or something? No, whatever.
So, public versus private functions. So private functions are functions that you've written as sort of little helpers inside your module, but are not exposed to the general public. So they're for your use only. Public functions are the ones that everybody else is going to use. Now, I don't care so much what you do in a private function that nobody's ever going to see. You write that how you like. But if you're writing a function that everybody's going to use, then it better take pipeline input.
That's true.
Yeah. The pipeline is absolutely the most powerful thing that PowerShell has to offer. And if you get it right, it can really help people out. And in all my testing, you know, get set, right? You get something, and you can, if you can pipe the object that you get out of get straight into set and get the same thing back, yeah, then you're doing well. You can pipe things by type. So I've got a logging function that I use a lot, and I've set it up so if you pipe an exception into the logging function, it will automatically do the right things, right? It will write a log with a timestamp, say error, and it will pull the message out of the exception. And that's just because I know I'm sending it an exception into the pipeline. You can also pipe by property name as well as type. So really good way to provide functionality for people to use your tools. Because sometimes, if I don't even need to know about what parameters it takes, because I just need a certain type out of an object, I can send it straight in. Be careful with creating your own types, because they're only available in PowerShell version 5.1 and above, so not very backwards compatible. But you can use the existing types. Do you know what's so anybody uses end server PowerShell? Right, don't start. It is awful. It has these things called opaque refs, which are like GUIDs. It has GUIDs as well, but it has opaque refs, and none of it takes pipeline input. It is a pile of poo. I've been on it as a product manager of ZenServer to change this. Thorsten, how long have I been talking to David about changing this?
I would say 6
years?
6 years, yeah, it's still shit.
Yeah.
The MCLI PowerShell is another example of
Yes.
horrible naming. MCLI-get space device.
Oh,
What?
MCLI-get, that's really horrible. So, you know, I have a snippet in VS Code that sets up an advanced function. Even when I'm doing private functions, it's super simple to allow pipeline input to your function. All right, help. Who writes help for their functions? Sometimes. I sometimes do as well. I should do for every single one. Easiest way to put help in a PowerShell function is comment-based help. That's great. Better than nothing, certainly. But it does mean that if you update your documentation, you have to have a new release of code, which is perhaps not the best. It's also not multi-language. Yeah? So what we want to do to make help a first-class citizen is both be able to update it separately from the code and localize it. Yeah? So comment-based help is a good first step, and I'll show you some tools in a second that will help with that.
So yeah, comment-based help is good for the programmer who comes after you. Some of the best comments I've seen in code, both C, C++, assembly language, PowerShell, is at the beginning of the function, I've seen it written as, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. So if you come along and you have to maintain that code afterwards, and let's say you were a better PowerShell programmer than that person, you can say, oh, he didn't know that this function even existed, or he didn't know about pipeline input. I can feel more comfortable changing this than I would if he just didn't describe it and his code was hard to read. So comments inside the code are for the programmer that comes after you. If you write them that way, you'd be surprised how much they help when you open the code 6 months, 9 months later. Oh, what was I doing here? And if you're like every other PowerShell programmer, you think you're so much smarter than you were 9 months ago. So it really helps to see what you were thinking back then. Okay? We got a. I'm sorry. I'm laughing at the at Jim's picture up here. If you have long-running PowerShell, we've talked to you about how to speed it up individually. But if you're doing tasks that perhaps you have to call an executable that's outside your function, you have the opportunity to do as job, and you should pass that in as a parameter to all your PowerShell modules that either are going to take a long time or they call executables or other things outside of PowerShell. You can also do run spaces. Were you doing run spaces on your stuff? So the big difference between them, right, is as job will create another instance of PowerShell, and as jobs, they're just APIs inside the Microsoft Win32 APIs. All kinds of code does that now. Programs are using as job. I'll give you an example. One of them is Visual Studio. When you're building a function, especially in C++, there's 4 passes on the compiler, and so it'll run 4 times. As job makes it very, very convenient for you to cancel. So if you're going to do something with an as job, you have to make it easy for them to cancel. What's nice about as job, when it cancels, it'll cancel, let's say, it starts up a new PowerShell module. That then turns around, your code calls something like an executable to do some stuff, and then that code calls another executable. If you cancel, it will cancel all the executables, so you don't have to go out and find any zombie processes and stuff like that. Run spaces are inside, and therefore code that has logical separations within the code in which you're doing separate tasks. Maybe you're multitasking the same item and you want to spawn off a bunch of them.
It is neither big nor clever to show off in shared code. I don't care how great you think you are because you can write something in a one-liner. Stop it. If I have to scroll right to read your code, you're doing it wrong. I have seen some awful showing off in code. Make it so everybody else can read it and can understand it. Yeah? I asked a question on Stack Overflow earlier on, and this is the answer I got back. And that's it, right? There was no explanation text. I was like, wow, that is a lot of punctuation without explanation. Holy shit, what does that do? Now, it turns out that the arsehole was correct. But it still took me 20 minutes to figure out how and why he was correct. Yeah? So I would not like to see this. So there's loads of aliases, abbreviations. This is actually one line of code, it's not 2 lines of code, right? So it's scrolling all the way up to the right. It is horrible to read, so please make sure you don't do stuff like that.
So they have a name for that, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
So Jim, what does it do?
So it removes, so if you're outputting an object, it actually removes all of the null or empty values, not just properties, but values from, properties and values from the object, so that it doesn't wreck your pipeline output when you're piping something that's got a parameter set.
So I would say the rule of thumb is, if you cannot judge what the code is doing without running it, it's wrong.
Did you hear that? Words of wisdom right there. If you cannot judge what the code is doing it when just by looking at it without actually executing it, then it's not good code. Okay? Yeah, they have a name for that, code golf. It's actually it used to be a really cool thing. Who could write the most complex thing in the least amount of space, right? Just like who can get the golf ball in the hole in the least amount of shots. The problem with it is now is basically everyone can write a one-liner because they've figured out how to write a compiler that will take a question mark and compile it into the answer. So code golf doesn't work as a thing up on the net anymore, but don't you do it. People think just the opposite of you in the enterprise world if you write that one line of code. Part of the reason why they're doing it is this is a runtime language. You don't compile PowerShell. It gets read, parsed, sent to the .NET, and then executed. Well, back in the day, like actually when we first came out with Java, the parsers used to suck. And they were very slow. And actually, what people would do is the first thing they'd do before they sent their code out was to take all the spaces out because the parser had to read them and it was slow. Then they decided the more they can put on one line, then the parser could read it much faster. And so that's where this originally started. That's why you have all these substitute commanders. Two reasons in PowerShell. One is for the command line, right? So when you're doing dir, it's really an alias for get content, right? Those items like that now, if you think about it, what Remco said, I have to load up your stuff into a debugger to figure out what it's doing. As soon as I see one line of code like that, I break it out into everything it was trying to do. All right. The other
We have to be a bit quicker, Kevin. By the way.
All right. Enough stories, Kevin. You scratch your elbow, and it reminds me of 20 years ago when I wrote his programs. Other people's code. The copy and pasters. This is great. We have an example of you here. I wanted to use some code for the AD PowerShell module, so I sent it to Jim first, and I said, Jim, does this code look right to you?
So, in this email from Kevin to me, he's doing get AD user 3 times to get exactly the same thing and then filtering it. Now, I didn't realize, stupidly, that this is actually in Kevin's code. I just thought he'd sent me some random stuff. So this is a lesson for all of you when your boss sends you code that they've written and asks you about it. Yeah, the first thing you do is, wow. And then, wow. And then you criticize the code. Yeah, 3 calls to get the same info. And then you're slightly patronizing when you say, here is a better way. And then eventually you give them the answer. And when you do that to your boss, yeah, really good.
So I didn't write the code. I copied it from Stack Overflow
and said, man, this is slow. Jim, what is wrong with this stuff? All right.
So, talking about speed. All right. So a lot of the stuff that we've covered actually is, if you do it properly, is actually faster. Yeah? Don't use aliases. because PowerShell's got to work out what they translate to. So you can get, if you eliminate all the aliases from your code, then you can get up to about a 40% speed increase. All right? Lots of console output. Anybody ever notice that you do get AD whatever, it writes output to the console and it takes 10 times as quick as if you put it in a variable? Particularly if you're using as job or run spaces where you think, oh, I don't care if I chuck a whole lot of output to the screen because it's in a thread and it's 15 minutes. Oh wow, okay, cool. We can slow down a little bit then. I did look at the agenda, but the times are really weird.
Yeah. You're time traveling. You're ending at 10 a.m.
I know, yeah. So I've seen this where people leave a lot of console output when they're running stuff in a different thread because they don't care, nobody's going to see it. Don't do that. If you don't do it, maybe you get a 20% speed increase. Filter left, format right. Yeah. Only grab as much data as the smallest amount of data you can from where you are. And if you need to format it, make sure you use that as the last possible command. And that will get you a massive speed increase. So if you're grabbing the whole of AD and then filtering afterward with where objects or whatever, don't do that because the commandlets themselves have got methods or parameters to filter out the input. So try and grab the smallest object that you need to then use. All right. Pull data once, unlike the code we showed you before. Make sure you pull the data once and don't go and get it again and again and again. Use methods. So, for instance, .where. A lot of Microsoft commands have .where instead of piping it to where object. That's actually faster. So if the object has methods that you can use those methods and you'll be faster rather than using the pipeline. Loops. This is one of the things I hate about PowerShell. For each is not an alias for for each object. Well, it is sometimes, depending on context, but it's also a different way of doing loops. For each is faster than for each object. Yeah, so if you can use for each, then do it. Now, this is the speed tip that I hate the most, or dislike the most, because I hate seeing C# code in PowerShell scripts, because if you're giving it to somebody else and they don't know C#, they don't know what's happening. They might know PowerShell really well, but they don't necessarily know C#. So I hate dropping down to other languages in PowerShell. Perfectly possible. It will, in a lot of cases, give you a small or even a large speed increase. But use it, I'd always prefer using a PowerShell native term rather than something else. Use parallelization. So effectively multi-thread your stuff wherever you can, not just in your own code, but you should also provide the ability for others, including an as-job parameter, if you've got any chance at all of this code taking a long time to run. And that will probably be if it touches an external system. So if you're interrogating an external system, then give them an as-job, because you've got a copy of vCenter up in your lab, and it takes no time at all, but someone else's vCenter might have 20,000 objects in it. And then it's going to take a long time to bring it back, whatever you're interrogating it for. Give people the opportunity to multi-thread your commands. And all of this stuff is in a great video, yeah, with lots more examples and shows you how to do it, which is linked at the bottom of this slide.
Question?
Jim,
Yes?
did you have a chance to use the new for each minus parallel option?
No, I have not had a look
For
at
each
that.
now supports parallelism.
Does it?
Yeah.
That's super cool. Thank you, Eugene. I shall use that. Is that? I presume it's 5.1 and above, though, is it?
Yeah.
I got customers who are like,
But that's the easiest parallelization option I found
Yeah.
so far. Not sure it's fast.
yeah. So if you know that you're right for an environment that will support the correct version of PowerShell, then you can take advantage of stuff like that in classes. There's all kinds of good stuff in PowerShell 5 that I'd like to use, but I don't generally, because even PowerShell 3 is not guaranteed in a lot of enterprises. So I try and I'm not writing for 2. Fuck that. But I'll write for 3. Yeah, and maybe in 2 years I'll switch over to write for 5 and 5.1
Well,
or 6.
our code goes.
Our code goes on other people's systems. If you're writing internally for your own system, you have 5.1, then I doubt you'll go backwards. So
Yeah.
I think Azure will be a big part in it too. It only Azure REM,
Yep.
remote management only supports PowerShell 5.
Yep. So Azure RM only supports 5 and above.
Yeah.
Does it work on 6?
I think so.
Okay. So 6 is weird because 6 is based on .NET Core and only has partial support for for all of the PowerShell commandlets because .NET Core doesn't have the full same API coverage as
But
.NET.
you can use it on Windows 10s, people.
And on Linux.
Mode, 10s mode.
Yeah.
So one comment on this tip, if I may.
Yeah.
When I write code that is dependent on a specific PowerShell version, then I usually also support all the versions. So I have like dependent code. If PowerShell version is X, do this. If it's Y, do that. And I have replaced this with not doing a check like if PowerShell version is X, Y, or Z. I have a define in the top that says support specific function, let's say for each parallel.
Yep.
And then I define the PowerShell versions that support this. Then in the code, I don't say if PowerShell version is 5 or higher, I say if supports the specific function I require. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Because it's much easier to maintain because maybe in PowerShell 11 a particular function is deprecated and removed and then this whole version checking fails, but I can do this once, so I check for the version once, I define something supports particular functionality that I require, that's what I check on later on.
Can I steal that code from you, Remco?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
If you ask, it's not stealing.
There you go.
Can you share that?
Yeah.
Is it on your GitHub?
I will confess that I use SVN because I find it so much easier than Git.
I don't care if you use versioning, that's fine.
Another thing is if you're working with contents of files, I find like using native objects is much better than get content. Because everything with PowerShell that deals with contents of files, people just do get content and assume that will be a straightforward way, but very slow.
Yeah, so there's so particularly for large files, when you're reading large files, get content is super slow. One of the reasons is because it puts each individual line as a member of an array. You can do sort of get content, I think it's -raw or something like that, to read it all in as one, and you can also drop down to other languages to make it faster too. Yeah, but get content is particularly bad for speed. Yeah. Who's heard of Pester? Yay, you good people. Pester is unit testing for PowerShell code. You can also use it for infrastructure testing. I did a session on that at E2E at some point in the past. Why I say sorta here is because it's more time consuming and harder to write unit tests for your code when you're doing it, but later on you will thank yourself. Yeah? What you can do with Pester is you can do something called mocking. What, mocking? Yeah? Okay. Which means that, they see, Devin gets it. It means that when you have code that touches an external system, you can pretend to your code that it is getting a return from an external system, but it's not really. You're actually mocking it to say, actually return this object. And then you can test a whole load more variations in terms of situations. You could say, well, what if it's broken? I can return an object that is an error, yeah, without having to take my AD down to test that particular functionality of the code. So anytime you, in unit testing, you're going to touch an external system, mock that function, so you never do. So unit testing is meant to be super quick, super fast, super easy to tell the developers, to tell you guys, yes, my change is working, no, it's not working. All right? If you just do unit tests, this is another thing I stole from Remco, I believe, years ago. If you just do unit tests, you may miss stuff. So you should do integration tests as well. But you shouldn't be running integration tests every single time you make a change to code. That's what unit testing is for. But you know, before, not at every commit, maybe at every push, you're doing a set of integration tests to make sure everything works end to end. And this is where you would touch external systems. Make sure that that works in terms of your testing. Stress testing. So you know how you want to run up a whole load of VMs and make sure your stuff works at scale. Only do this at release. So that was a quick 10 minutes. Yeah. There's something wrong about time today, I think. I'm going to quickly cover this. PlatyPS is the ability to write external help. So it's a tool that effectively lets you use Markdown language as the source of truth for your help. So you write it in Markdown, which is super easy to use, and also you can stick that up as your online documentation. You can Markdown is web friendly. You can also automatically convert Markdown into external XML based help, which is horrible to read, and you can also use it to do cab files, which means that update help will work. And that means that you only write your help once. Yeah. You separate your documentation from your code. You allow update help to work so people can get updates to your documentation. And you can also use the same exact place for web-based documentation as well. So use PlatyPS.
Okay, the reason people don't use it, the reason people don't write their own pester tests is they're a pain in the butt to set up. Who knows what Plaster is? Plaster makes it no longer a pain in the butt to set up. So basically, since we're running out of time, though, I'm just going to tell you, we won't go into all the modules. I do want to point out that there is no set Plaster template, but basically what you do is you make a new manifest, and it is in your code. Using Visual Studio Code is the best place to do this. Control P or F1, type the word Plaster, install it if you have to, but basically when you run it, it's going to let you set up a new project, which then you can save in a workspace. You do that, and it's going to set up your pester test for you. It'll be empty, but it'll set up your help for you. It'll be empty, but it's going to give you all the framework that you need to get that started. And we can just wander through these. This is just me showing you how to do it.
CI/CD. So CI/CD is continuous integration, continuous deployment. So all of this together brings you to CI/CD. So it means you can automate your testing. So you should be able to, from within VS Code, so you can put every time you do a commit, you can automatically run your pester tests. Anytime you do a commit which says integration or release, you can then also run these. You can hook up your CI/CD tools to GitHub. So AppVeyor is the one that I use for GitHub. So I connect it to my GitHub. Whenever I push code into that repo, AppVeyor notices it will spin up a nano machine in Azure. Yeah, it will run all my pester tests in Azure, and it will come back and put a nice little badge on my README in GitHub saying this current release passes all of the developers' tests. So this means that you don't have to ever leave your editor to spin up machines in Azure and automate all of your testing. Yeah, it's very cool to use CI/CD. And lastly, invoke build. So there's two common build automation frameworks. One is invoke build, which I slightly prefer, and the other one is called Saki. But this means that you can automate everything in terms of all your testing or your CI/CD. All you do is just invoke build and it will run whatever you want it to run, including calling external things. And now you can say, okay, what happens if I do commit message release? Yeah, invoke build will take all of that. It will run your CI/CD tools. It will run all your pester tests, and then if you pass, then it will automatically create a release, or can automatically create a release in GitHub. and then publish your module to the PowerShell gallery, or if you're internal to a website. And it means that you can do all of this without ever leaving your editor, which is so nice to be able to do, because it means that for you and also for your colleagues, the barrier to entry to writing good code is really low, and they get instant feedback on when it's bad. If you want to know more about some of this stuff, I do have a YouTube channel, feel free to watch it. And if you want to know more, again, this session is great.
So, is that it? We done? We out of time?
We're out of time.
Very last thing I will say about this. For your careers, okay? Everyone writes bugs. Everyone writes bugs. Every single program in the world has bugs, including Hello World, okay? If someone looks over your code and sees that you've done an enterprise module, they're going to forgive your bugs. They'll say, oh, he has a bug, he needs to go fix it. If they go look at your code and it looks like spaghetti, they're going to say, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, let's get a new guy in there. Okay? Keep that in mind.
Thank you for the hint on how to keep my job.
Keep job is not a...
Keep job is not forever, yeah. So, thank you very much for coming to see us talk about PowerShell. I hope you've learned at least a little something. So, cheers guys.